And I'm really excited that we get to talk to Bill Moses this morning, because I've spent probably in total like 4 to 6 full days of my life on the phone with Bill Moses, and I can tell you that there are a dozen really interesting topic-specific conversations that can be had with him, from investment strategy to thoughts on testing methodologies for new products, to winery development, to big media. But today, we're in a position to have him join us for what I'm going to call an instructive victory lap. Just about 6 months ago, Bill closed on the sale of KeVita to PepsiCo. And we're going to have this conversation to look back on how he did it, what the strategic execution was. We're going to have a kind of what I've learned for beverage entrepreneurs. The idea is to share what the experience has been like for someone who is able to successfully start, grow, disrupt, and sell a company within this industry with what felt like, for an upstart brand, remarkably few hiccups. So please join me in welcoming Bill Moses. What did you do before this, and how'd you get into the business?
Yeah, so, well, before I got into KeVita, I was a winemaker, and I made organic wine, first certified organic winery in California. And before that, I, worked in different industries. But really, what motivated me to get into the RTD space was really looking at the beverage space and realizing how exciting it is.
Where's the excitement come from?
Well, it's really interesting. Like when I look at RTD, you look at a category or a space where you have something that can touch people's lives every day. It's got huge consumer impact. You've got something that's flavorful, that's inspirational, that's functional. So when you add it all together, it's like, where else would one want to play if they had a choice? It's really like the main stage. The center aisles aren't so exciting, but when you walk in and you see a grab and go and there's a beverage and you can identify with it, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, I've been covering the business for about 13 years now, and one thing that you find out is everyone's an expert on what they enjoy and what kind of drink someone should make. But it's really hard to make it and then to build it out and to create a successful business out of it. So what I want to talk a little bit about is what went into the brand early on strategically that enabled it to compete and win. And I think one of the most important things we've talked about is you really started pricing first.
Sure. So really interesting strategy that we employed. We looked at price first. We saw that the category was priced around $4 or $5, and we wanted to come in at $2.99. So, we realized in building out the model that, at $2.99, we knew that we could gain trial, we could win at shelf, but we didn't have the gross profit margin. We were running at the low 20% gross profit margin at a $2.99. And I think what we really focused on doing, we took the time to look at the plan of execution to really get our cost of goods down and to get our full variable cost margin up. So around that, we premeditatively had a plan of execution once we went out at $2.99 to get the cost of goods down. And it was, some of the younger brands, good.
I just think this is interesting because one of the things that we constantly hear advised is you don't want to chase margin.
Well, you don't want to chase margin. You have to have a plan to attain margin. And I think what we did was we really we set KPIs on cost of goods and we had a plan for getting cost of goods down, and we had a plan for getting our margins up. So I think as it related to that, we didn't go in blindly, we went in thoughtfully. And you really can, when you look at an early stage brand, you look at supply agreements, you look at co-packing agreements, you look at internal shipping, and you start off and you're paying you're buying the supply, whatever you can get, because you're so small. You're not really going in long term and saying, look, we're going to be buying this much over time. How can we negotiate down our cost? You go into a co-packer, you're on your knees, you're paying $4 a co-pack, whatever. You really don't take the time to model out and say, over time with volume, we're going to get to $2 a case or $1.15 a case, which is our case. So at the end of the day, if you have the time and the visibility and the discipline to map out all those things in advance and you have a pathway to getting your margin up, go on price, go fast, and win shelf. So that was our strategy.
But you didn't in the end go co-pack, right?
Well, it's funny. We ended up spending $4 a case initially at a place here in LA, and it was horrible. We had quality issues. We had it was a mess. But we ultimately negotiated with different other co-packers. One up in Northern California, Langers and Castle in Pittsburgh, where we actually put equipment in. We actually partnered. I think one of the lessons that entrepreneurs could take is, as opposed to going into these negotiations with co-packers and suppliers as an us versus them, really go in as a partnership. So we went in and we said, look, we'll put equipment in there. We'll help you bring your costs down so that we could share in that cost. So at the end, yes, we ultimately, part of our pathway to get to 60+% gross profit margin from 24%, we ended up bringing in the bottling facility in-house. And we had a great COO, and he just did an exemplary job in executing that. And that ultimately gave us quality control, and it gave us 6 more margin points.
So you had 6 more margin points.
Yeah.
So I just, when you talk to people about this company, what's really interesting is they talk about how clean a balance sheet it had. Yeah. How carefully thought out a lot of the financials were, so that you can just name that number is pretty exciting, pretty interesting.
Well, I think one of the other lessons was when you go in to talk to banners, banner due diligence. When you go in and you're talking to Whole Foods or NCG and for whoever it might be, really go in with due diligence. Know what their margin range is. Don't, if you go in and you take what they give you, you're going to pay the upper end of the range of margin. And also when you do your TPRs, same kind of thing. You got to find a way to get them to compress, so that ultimately when you're going in and you're getting your deal and you're doing your feature, you really do the best you can and you get the best possible margin when it comes to banner negotiations. So that was a best practice that we had, and that was I think really integral as well to our success.
What were some of the other key drivers to keep things growing so smoothly?
Well, I think the number one thing was innovation. I think we kept on coming up with an innovation pipeline well in advance of what our capacity was. The other thing that kept things moving pretty smoothly was certain strategic alliances. We partnered up with, obviously, PepsiCo. We partnered with Safeway. We partnered with Dynamic Presence on a national brokerage relationship, not on an investment basis. And I think at the end, those sort of strategic partnerships really benefited us. Also, I think really winning at shelf, really having best practices to really help drive growth. And then ultimately, the biggest thing that really catapulted us was the 2010 kombucha pull, and that was the major pivot for us, where we were going regional DSD. And all of a sudden, we had an opportunity to go national, because Whole Foods wanted to fill the shelves of when the kombucha got pulled, because we were a water kefir, not a kombucha at the time. And so we pivoted and went from a model of DSD regional to broadline national. And I think what it really did was it enabled us to save a lot of margin points. you go DSD, you're 25, 30% margin points, and you're paying a lot of spiffs and programs. We went broadline, and it brought our margin down to cost plus 8% with UNFI. But really what that enabled us to do was really build our brand from the street up with our merchandising efforts and best practices. So I think that was the main thing that enabled us to win was that national rollout.
But hitting the spigot like that is it sunk a couple of companies in the category. So I want to know what the difference was that enabled you guys to sort of operationally scale up.
Sure.
And on a communications basis with sales and marketing to make that work.
Yeah, so it was a total risk. I mean, everyone thought, a lot of people thought, going national overnight was suicide. It was just took a lot of internal diligence. I mean, when it really comes down to it, when you go national, again, it was KPIs and best practices and execution. And so at the end of the day, having the right resources, having the right plan, knowing what your KPIs are, what your key performance indicators are, where you had to hit, and with best practices, it was really executional. And if we would have just had one hiccup on an executional detail, we definitely would have stumbled. So I think that was the key thing, having great people and having a great plan and executing.
Now, one of the things that you and I have discussed is there was not just disruption, but some level of competitive disruption.
Yeah, well, it's good,
competitive edge. And was that something that came out of the 2010 scare? Was that a strategy you realized, or was that something you'd hatched early?
We talked about this in an earlier interview. I think your whole position was, you posed the question, in an early stage category, is disruption something we really want to entertain, or something like that? And yeah, sure. I mean, for me, when I got into the category, I knew that there was an alcohol issue. And then as I got deeper into the space, running the company, I realized that there was an issue with sugars. I mean, the brands were claiming 2 grams of sugar, when they had 10 grams in there. And so for me, there was a veracity and a truth in labeling that had to come out. So I definitely disrupted. I went forward. I did the testing, third-party testing, and we went to the banners, and I went to the brands, and I said, look, I went to the banners, and I said, there was a poll. It might happen again. They haven't gotten their ship right. We invested in our IP to get our ship right, and we're the ones that want to lead. Put us on shelf. Give us more shelf. So I really got to know the competition. And so the disruption was this truth in labeling initiative that was based on real science and IP. And, I came under some critique from competitors. Why are you doing this? But I met with every one of them. I met with the stakeholders of them or the founders. And I sat across them and I said, you guys aren't playing by the rules. It's unfair competition. And more importantly, when you're saying there's no alcohol in it and there's 2 or 3%, you're putting certain consumers at risk. So at the end of the day, the disruption was predicated on first innovating a solution and then leading with consumer and retail consciousness that ultimately gave us the mission to really drive the brand from a product level, not necessarily from a cultural level, which kind of segues into marketing.
But I did want to talk about this for one more instant, because there's a lot of talk to the trade, and there was talk to the competition. But what I think is interesting is that there was also talk within the selling process to the gatekeepers. Yeah. And were at any point were they saying, look, this is getting a little political?
Well, I mean, I think certain banners, certain folks, they don't want to hear about it, and we respected that. I mean, we went in peddling softly. We simply really featured how ours was compliant and what it meant for us to be compliant. And if they opened up the conversation about compliance, we jumped through that hoop quick. So, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, certain folks didn't want to touch it, and other folks really wanted to hear about it. And at the end of the day, I think that 25-30% of our success in getting early adoption nationwide was as much about the veracity that we came forth with on the truth in labeling and our product than anything else. So I think it really did matter to us.
You think it's that at the consumer level or at
I don't think, no, I think it's
at the commercial
it's
level?
getting it commercial, getting it on shelf.
Okay,
right, yeah.
so this is, and now let's talk about the marketing, because we have this incredibly successful execution on a commercial level.
Yeah.
One of the early crossover brands, not as Jamie was talking about sort of coming through conventional, but the eye was always toward crossing over.
Right.
And yet you had more marketing directors than Spinal Tap had drummers.
We did, yeah. Yeah, it was really interesting, one of the questions you posed earlier was, what was learning? Where did we fall short? I was so product centric. I was looking at the science, the functionality, all those, and then of course, obviously the disruption on the truth in labeling, the innovation, that I never really got my arms around, what a lot of brands win on, which is culture, which is having a cause, a B Corp, or, really creating this aspirational brand that has a great promise and all those wonderful, important marketing sort of mantras. And so we had great marketing people come in and leave, and at the end of the day, I was so hyper-focused on the product that I really didn't give the platform to the marketing folks to really push the brand to a higher level. And I think at the end of the day, we didn't need it because the brand had so much in the bottle that we didn't need to build a lot of flowery puffery around the culture. So it was just a different approach, but I think ultimately, yeah, we went through, I think, 4 marketing directors in 5 years, and it was tough, and all of them were great, and it just, it was my show, not their show on that level.
So it shows the power of execution. Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you this, because I know you're ex-money guy, though. Do you think lack of a hard shell brand umbrella hurt you on exit?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because exit, exit was superlative. I think longer term, you look at brands in the space like, obviously GT Dave and Health Aid. I mean, they've got a halo over them. I mean, it's amazing what they have done, the founders, to build a brand. So I think longer term, I think it would definitely have served us as the competition on shelf had gotten more competitive, because other than GT, we beat Health Aid. We went fast, so we were really the challenger brand. But I think longer term, it was something that we needed to do and would have done in order to really long term drive the pull. This is all about pull, not push. So yeah, we needed that for the pull longer term.
Was it a conscious choice early on? We got to focus on execution. We're going to let brand follow.
Well, I think in any new category, when you have such functionality, it's about functionality. I mean, it's about probiotics, supporting digestive health, helping the immune system in a format that was low sugar, So at the end of the day, when like I said, a new category that's functional, that's what's going to drive. That's where your messaging should be. And that's where we started. So yeah, I think if I would have done it again, I would have done it the same way.
It was we had an interesting conversation a couple of days ago with a guy from the Hartman Group when we were at Project Nosh, and basically his point was, for a lot of product categories, if you're below $40, $50 million, you don't really have a brand, you have a product. And you have to get that kind of lined up before you can really bloom that brand aspect.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. It's on-trend products are products that really have something to offer that others don't, and it's not so much about everything that you build around it early on. Yep.
So you did partner with an innovation group early on within a strategic.
Well, yeah. So initially, PepsiCo had Naked Emerging Brands, and the driver there was Chris Lansing, who was superlative. I mean, she was such a mentor, such a steward of us externally and internally, and of course with her team, Jerome and Daniel Grubbs, all the way up the chain, to Zain Abdullah, who was the president. But we really, I think what they gave us wasn't so much innovation. They really gave us some of the KPIs on how a big company looks at things. What percentage of our on-volume trade spend should constitute our overall sales, finding that KPI. Obviously, they helped us with some DSD distribution, which ultimately represented about 10% of our sales at time of sale. But as it related to sort of the innovation of it, their food and safety department sat on top of us, and we knew that we had a bar that was so high on compliance for them to pull the trigger that having them in early was absolutely critical. Because a big CPG company like PepsiCo, whose food safety comes first and compliance comes first, if we would not have had them in, we would have definitely had issues at exit in meeting their due diligence requirements.
So it could have been a bigger cost center for you early on, getting those things together.
Yes, exactly.
Tell us about the role of your board and your investors.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm one of these guys that believes in big boards. I believe that boards shouldn't be country clubs. It shouldn't be your father, your uncle, your brother, your best friend, or a guy that gave you your first $500,000. A board needs to be always upgraded. You need to bring in smart people. You need to be ready to sacrifice yourself and giving the board the total power so that if you're not performing, you're out of there. And that was my relationship with the board. We had a 7-member board with 2 visitors. Safeway was a visitor and PepsiCo was a visitor. And the board was constituted with guys that I thought was smarter than me. I had guys like Brad Barnhorn on the board who was an industry leader, and our PE company, Island Carp, was just so management friendly. So you always want a board that's smarter. You always want a board that's going to tell you what you need to hear, and you always want a board that's going to be supportive. And never be afraid to upgrade your board, and never be afraid of your board. So that's my point of board.
I know you got to make a plane. So I want to ask, what kind of other advice, last minute, do you have for our team here as they go forward?
Yeah. So I think the advice is if you're really serious about this, and there's a lot of dilettantes in the space. You really have to pitch your tent. You have to weather the desert storm. You have to bring in people that are. You have to not have fear of bringing in people that are smarter than you, that know more, and you also have to do your planning, your strategic planning. And if you don't know how to do that and you're an innovator, then bring someone in that can really lay out your strategy, your tactics, and follow it and hold yourself accountable to it and do the homework.
Thank you very much.
Sure, man. Sure, thanks. Yeah.